Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, the first in New York No-Go's Masterclass series on Retail Media 2025. What does the near future hold? My name is Jay Lundin. I'm formerly Director of Modernization at Staples, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. I do want to provide some context for today's discussion, though. Retail media is not slowing down. As retailers look to uncover new opportunities to grow site revenues, brands are being forced to make decisions about their media investment strategy. The number of advertising options continues to grow, innovations are being introduced frequently, and both retailers and brands are being forced to adjust on the fly. The question is, where does this all net out? And do the retail media innovations of today give us any hint as to where we're going? I'm joined today by two people who are leading this innovation and may be able to shed some light on where we're headed. Mark Williamson, Head of Media Partnerships at Peadpod Digital Labs. Mark has a track record for creating solutions in the complex, competitive, and fast-paced world of retail media. He specializes in driving partnerships with CPG manufacturers, suppliers, and technology vendors, and has grown retail media businesses for some of the world's biggest retailers, including Sam's Club and Walmart. Andreas Reiffen, who's founder and CEO of Crealytics. Andreas is an entrepreneur, marketing technologist, and a recognized expert in data-driven advertising. His company, Crealytics, specializes in helping brands and retailers at all points of their product advertising lifecycle, including incrementality testing, data-activated performance advertising, and retail media. Mark and Andreas, thank you both for being here. Very much appreciated.
Hi, everyone.
Morning, everybody.
Before we jump in, I was told that we need to handle a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll have the recording available for everyone who attends in the coming days. You'll find a box on the Zoom screen where you can post your questions. We've left 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. We'll try to get to all of your questions. One important note, please don't use the chat box to post your questions. It's not being monitored. Only use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Also, next week brings us the next event in our Masterclass series, Achieving Perfect Zen, Balancing Retailer Profits Alongside Brand ROI and User Experience, featuring speakers from Overstock, Sam's Club, and Ashley Home Furniture. And that is October 14th from 12 to 1. Now that we're done with the housekeeping, let's begin. Before we jump into the future, we'd love to hear about both of your journeys. Mark at Ahold USA and Andreas at Crealytics. Mark, we can start with you on this one.
Thanks, Jay, and appreciate everybody making the time. It's great to be with you somehow, some way through technology. So I joined Ahold USA about 4 years ago. I'd been with Sam's Club and Walmart e-commerce for 6 years previous to that. And all of my experience in retail has been on the retail media or retail monetization aspect of the business. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart, something that I'm excited to talk about. But 4 years ago, Ahold reached out and offered an opportunity to build a monetization program. There were certainly elements of retail media throughout the organization. Peapod had built a pretty nice monetization business for themselves on the e-commerce portion of the business. There were areas of shopper marketing that had been built up. And then what I call really retail media 1.0, those really passive income streams that come from multi-retailer networks that are really easy for a retailer to sign on for, but don't really constitute a retail media strategy. So I joined the organization right around the time Ahold was merging with Delhaize as omnichannel was becoming a focus. And there was a recognition that there was an opportunity to get more structured and more methodical about how we grow retail media within the organization. And I would say at the time, the key driver was FOMO. That's really where what I heard from the organization was everybody's doing something. We are not. What should we be doing? And so it's been a journey since then, something that's been I've been excited to be a part of, and something that we've seen some great success from. So I'd certainly echo how you teed it off, Jay, which is that retail media is big, it's growing, it's not going anywhere, and I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Great. Andreas?
Yeah, so we actually come from the search space and ran large-scale search campaigns, initially text ads. And at some point, Google launched the shopping formats, or PLAs, and a few years later we realized that the same thing was kind of moving into a retail environment where brands started to bid in order to position their products. And this was the point of time where we said, hey, we are specialists in Google Shopping. Let's just make this happen within a retail environment. And this was the point of time when we started building tech around this. So today we have a proprietary solution to rent sponsor products on large retailers' websites. And we've just recently broadened the scope and have a full monetization solution, which comprises on-site display, but also any sort of off-site activity. So the idea is to have a single point of contact for brands and then spend their budgets across all different channels, whether it's on-site and off-site, and simplify the process and facilitate retailers to better monetize their traffic and help brands to get a better return out of their spend.
Great, that's great. A question for both of you. So within my experience in the space, the foundation of retail media has been display ads and sponsored product listings. And we're seeing innovation in terms of ad types, native, interactive widgets, hybrid branding, SKU-based stuff, and omni-channel experiences are becoming more common. What type of innovation in ad unit types, or innovation in general, do you think need to happen in the next 5 years? And I'll leave it to either whoever wants to start. Mark, if you want to answer that one first.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a cliche. We're going to continue to see change. That it's the one thing that is a certainty, is that it'll continue to evolve. And I've certainly seen a lot of evolution from where we started, which were basically non-IAB standard, non-ad served, just placements on a site, to then moving into more standardization, more programmatic capabilities, and then connecting into networks, and then getting much more programmatic and performance-based and that kind of thing. So there's been an evolution, and I know Andy has some thoughts there. So what I would focus on is really more, I think, more of that omni-channel experience. I see a continued disruption in the total customer journey. Retail media is really has really cut its teeth in the e-commerce space because it's addressable. There's a lot of, you can lift and shift a lot of media products from, whether it's a social media network, a search platform, or normal web content monetization. You can drop that onto a retail website and say, we have stuff for sale. But in the total in the total commerce journey, the total customer journey, a lot of customers still spend an awful lot of time in store. And so I think over the next 5 years, you're going to see retailers take what works well on an e-commerce platform and bring those best practices and those learnings into the physical space. And so if we look at, if for my company, you look at the about 26 million loyalty card holders, a good chunk of them and an increasing amount of them are digitally engaged. They're on our websites. They get our emails. We have the right kind of data to be able to target them from an audience extension perspective. But a lot of the interactions that we have with customers are limited to the physical experience. And so you think about, what is the engagement at the aisle? What's the engagement at the register? What's the engagement in a parking lot, or in our case, a fuel station, which is a really high dwell point. As an advertiser, there's a lot of interest there. And so what I see is, we've learned a lot online. We've learned what works, what doesn't work. We learn what we're excited about, and how do we bring those capabilities, whether it's programmatic ad buying, business, rules-based triggering, auction concepts. How do we bring that into our physical assets? How do we digitize and modernize what we're doing in store? And so I think that retailers are going to continue to figure this out. They've got to figure out, how do you appropriately monetize the pickup experience? And then how do you create a seamless customer communication platform that may start online, but can very, very easily, and in a lot of cases, ends up in the store. So that's going to continue to evolve, and something that I'm super excited about, and something that we certainly have spent a lot of time debating in our organization.
Yeah, from my side, let's focus on the flagship product of monetization, which is clearly sponsored product attracting large budgets. If you take a look at the very early days, retailers approached it as every other publisher. You had content, and then you had advertising around it. in the top row, you displayed some sponsored products. On the right side rail, you had some products. And more and more companies have realized that this is also a dangerous play, because you sacrifice your premium inventory and eventually you push in products which are not fully relevant and unrelated. And then you get some advertising revenue in, but you might harm your retail margin. And the change is now changing in the sense that it's going to be a way more integrated experience. If you take a look at Amazon in the early days, you still had a lot of ads on the side rail. Now you see they can appear everywhere. So they have more and more merged organic and paid together. Just recently, I think it was like 2 months ago, eBay announced that they had merged the two algorithms. On the search side, they now include their organic, or they base the ranking on their organic ranking, and then they move products up in the grid. The intention is always make things as relevant as possible and don't have two distinct algorithms. So what we are going to see in the future, that probably the vast majority of all slots where products can appear can be monetized, but the way it's going to be done, it's not that there's a separate ranking algorithm pushing ads in, but it's fully integrated and tied into this organic ranking. And that's something we are currently seeing at most companies which develop proprietary technology, while most third-party providers still have this disconnected approach. And this is something which will fundamentally change, and there's way more awareness now that you have to combine the two things, your retail margin and your monetization, and not drive one thing and sacrifice the other. A second thing I'm seeing is that brands actually get more and more data from marketplaces or retailers. So they can get competitive benchmarks, they can see all the data which was hidden before, and can have the ability to refine their value proposition, to tailor their offering for specific audiences, which wasn't possible before. But that's a great kind of cooperation between the retailer side and the brand side. And the last point I'd like to highlight is, clearly, there's appetite for much more transparency. So far, we've seen no attribution, post-view attribution. So you get numbers which are just kind of random. You cannot rely on these numbers. In the early days, the brands took these numbers just for granted and based their investment decisions on the numbers which were played back. But we see, as more and more budget is going into retail media, the big guys have become much smarter. So they have started to better measure performance. And this, I think it's very interesting to see where this will take the whole retail media landscape, because it shuffle around where the budgets go, how much you invest. And it's a long way to go, but we see a lot of push from major brands.
It's a great segue to the next question. So Mark, you said something in our prep conversation this week that now that retailers are acting like publishers, brands are treating them like publishers. This includes asking for greater accountability for measurement, transparency, and control in their advertising programs. How has the demand of additional performance data changed the way you run campaigns today?
Yeah, there's a couple of different shifts, and part of it is on the demand for transparency and for whether it like speed of data, self-serve, and like I think there's a lot on the side of delivery. Like the idea of I ran a campaign and 6 weeks later I get a PDF that may or may not tell me a story. Like those days are really like we're past those days, and so the demands for real-time, self-serve, meaningful access to data is certainly a big part of it. And then on the other side, like if I look at my own personal journey through this, for the first 5 years of my retail media career, we spent we worked really hard to separate media from merchandising, and really the rationalization for that was that if we're a media publisher, we should be agnostic to what the retail story is. We're a platform for an advertiser to reach an audience. And we may use retail data to inform their targeting or to help measure against sales. There's still a bit of a disconnect. We still focused on things like impressions and reach and frequency, brand recall, some of the more traditional media metrics. And that was when we say we want to be a media publisher, that's what you would get from most media publishers. But brands don't think that way. They're, well, you're a retailer. And so I would say for the second 5 years of my time in retail media, it's been very different, where we've done actually the heavy lifting to bring the retail media conversation into the merchandising conversation, because retail media works not only because it can be enhanced by actual retail data, it can actually make a merchandising plan better. It can make it perform better. And when we see, if you stack a sale and you put it in the ad and you put on an end cap and then you amplify with retail media, you can get more out of that. And so we need to bring the retail media into more of a strategic part of category management. And that's not easy to do. This is very, very difficult. But what happens is not only does the expectation of transparency and speed change, but now the question becomes, how did this impact my share? How did this impact category penetration? How many new buyers did I convert? How many new online orders were created because of the media that I paid for? And none of these questions were asked 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But increasingly, the questions they don't sound like media questions. They sound like category management questions. And that's great. Like it's indicative of the fact that retail media is now getting to a level of maturity where it can be considered a strategic part of a category management growth plan. It's not just brand marketing, and I'm using a retail platform because it's slightly better than my other options, or I'm not using retail media because I have a shopper marketing program or a national brand platform, and it gives me the ability to reach customers for a certain period of time. Now here's my commercial plan for the first 6 months of the year. I'm going to be on sale in these weeks. How do I use retail media to get more mileage out of my trade investment? And we used to actually avoid those conversations. It was too complicated to have them. And if I had a brand and I'm sitting down and they say, hey, I'll buy retail media if you give me an end cap, I would say, meeting over. This is the wrong meeting. Like, that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about media. Now, those conversations should be happening in the same meeting. And actually, a merchant should be saying, hey, we got a great core plan here. We got a great assortment, great promotional plan. How are we going to use retail media to amplify it? And that's a huge shift. And I think the fact that brands are pushing retailers to be better on the data side is is fueling those conversations. So it's scary and exciting all at the same time.
And do you think that like those publishers or those retailers who are not up to speed on the data side will see their dollars shift to retailers who are?
Most definitely. So I think the first indications of this were, probably 5 years ago when viewability and fraud became a big thing. If you couldn't meet viewability or fraud thresholds, or you couldn't validate, then you didn't get money. Like there are rules that says I can't spend on any publisher that doesn't meet these criteria. And I think the same thing will happen now. If I can't have these KPIs tracked in a meaningful way, then my money will go to a retailer that can. So absolutely, I think that standard will continue to raise, which will push brands to keep asking the right questions, and for retailers to be obligated to make sure that they can answer them.
Interesting. Andreas, what are you seeing from a vendor side of the publisher ask from a reporting standpoint?
So first of all, I can confirm everything Mark just mentioned. We see a similar direction here. So the situation as of today is many times that it's a cluttered market of different providers. So if you as a brand want to run retail media at many retailers, you deal with one external provider for sponsored products, another one for display, a third one for let's say offsite display, and they all have different attribution. And the questions are now coming in, and people want to clarify what is this attribution specifically? Is it a post view? How many days? Is it a post click? Then on the sponsored product side, you have things like you can track the product which was clicked, and also the same product was sold, but eventually one product was clicked and someone bought a different product. So would you report this? And the companies out there, they're trying to show the greatest possible ROI. So you apply a 1 day post view window and then a 14-day post click. And you also report on the products which were sold but not clicked. And this way you can just inflate things to a phenomenal return. So the questions which we get is, hey, can we put some attribution in place? We want to really understand what we are getting back. And that's a really tough situation, because there might have been someone who has based the investments on what he has seen in the last couple of years. And once you apply attribution, the numbers might not look as favorable as they did at the beginning. And that's the current friction we are seeing. And it's going to take a while, but definitely as the space matures, companies will focus on better measurement. And we see this already on Amazon, for example, where companies try to really test what happens if we just shut down our campaigns, and then they get a better sense for the true value. And we see this across the board. It started many years ago and will probably continue for the next 10 years, I would say.
So speaking of maturing programs, so I've talked about in the past, literally to anyone who would listen, about the life cycle of a monetization media business. So 3 to 4 years ago, Walmart was running 8 300 by 250s in the footer. Meanwhile, I was struggling to get 1 300 by 250 in the footer. Within that life cycle of a media program, there's the internal conversation about buy, build, partner. Do you believe that we're going to see more publishers building in-house at program launch versus partnering? And Andreas, I guess I'll start with you on that one. Do we foresee, because there's more people in the space, me, for example, like if I went somewhere else, like I'd have a different perspective than I did 5 years ago because I've already kind of done it. Like, do we see more publishers building in-house at launch versus partnering or buying?
I think it's hard to generalize here, because companies have totally different DNAs, and there are some retailers technically which they buy products and sell them, but they see themselves as tech companies. And these guys will probably try to own everything and to build the whole tech stack. A very good example is Zalando in Europe. They're the clear leader here in the fashion category in platform and marketplace business. And what they did, they didn't build everything in-house, but they bought different components. And it's a very favorable environment currently, with ad tech being a very difficult market. There are lots of struggling companies having great tech, but not being able to really monetize this. So what these guys did, they bought all the different components. It was 5, 6, 7 companies, I guess. Then they continue to merge everything and have a whole proprietary monetization solution, whole Zalando marketing services organization. And that's the way they approach it. There are other companies who would say, no, our core expertise is retail. And we are not a tech company. We don't want to deal with all that stuff. So we either license tools and use them to run things in-house, or they even license tools and buy the services on top. And it's hard to judge what's the better approach. I think it makes a lot of sense. If you don't have a tech DNA, you probably should stay away from trying to build tech. Which
I'd agree. Yes, I'd agree. Yeah. Mark, for you, like, what are the challenges, and Andreas kind of hit on it, but like, what are the challenges that you've seen about building in-house?
Yeah, so I completely echo what Andy said. Like, it is spot on. Actually, very similar to what I had thought for an answer here. And really, what we have to remember, like, there's a fundamental truth, is that unless a retailer is younger than 20 years old, like they are not media companies. They're operators and they're merchants. And if I look at the companies I work for, like 50 years ago, Sam Walton didn't dream up in his old truck building a massive worldwide retailer so he could sell product listing ads. That's not the DNA of Walmart. I look at my company today. We have brands in the Northeast that are older than 100 years. We have 3rd, 4th, 5th generation shoppers. When these companies were started, that was not the intent. And so our core competencies are not retail media. If I think about how long it takes for us to add a tag to our site, and then I think, okay, let's build a whole platform, it's just a non-starter. So like when I look at this, like it really comes down to a retailer having an honest conversation with themselves and saying, do I have a right to win? And if so, where? What are we good at? What are we not good at? And are we all bought in? And I think one thing that I've experienced is that like I've had a lot of success getting buy-in in the executive leadership group in organizations. It's easy to go in and convince a CFO that monetization is a must-have. Very easy conversation. A merchant, you can kind of get them to ignore it. With the chief marketer, you'll do battle forever and ever and ever. But in general, though, it's easy to get the C-suite to say, you know what, this makes sense, and even to get them to say, we must do this. If not, we are in trouble. Like that part's easy. What is critical for a retailer to succeed here is to have buy-in at all levels, up, down, side to side. If you're going to do it right, if you're going to bolt on a third party and you're going to keep it off the radar and you'll cash the checks, you can do that, but that's not scalable and it's not best practice. And it's not great for the advertising partners. It's not great for the customers. And I think that's really the evolution that we've seen. And so when we map out, because I get asked this question all the time, are we going to insource? Should we insource? What should we do? What elements do we insource? And I would really argue that that a retailer needs to be the master of their domain. They need to be in control of their destiny and say, this is what retail media means to us. This is what role it plays strategically in our organization. Here's what we want it to do. Here's how we'll resource it. Here's how we'll invest in it. But then leave the day-to-day capabilities and execution to those who do it best. And so that might mean licensing technology. It might mean outsourcing aspects of it. If you think of what a retailer does well, retailers are relatively good at shaking down CPGs for money. That might be one thing. Hey, you know what? Let's hone our skills over there, but let's not convince ourselves we can build an ad tech platform. Probably a reasonable expectation. So I just think it's very difficult. And so when I think like a retailer that's doing this right has insourced the strategy, has insourced the control, has insourced the decision that this is a strategic imperative, because that's critical. But that doesn't mean you need to insource. Like for me personally, I think some kind of hybrid model is a winning model, unless you're less than 20 years old and you're a tech company masquerading as a retailer. Like I like exactly how you said it, Andy. I couldn't agree more. But for most of us, our core competency is buying and selling goods to customers and running stores. And we can't lose focus on that, because if we do, we lose. But we have to figure out how to do this. And that takes wisdom. It takes trade-offs. And I think it takes a good collection of partners to get it done.
To add something to this, I mean, the tech side is pretty obvious and clear. Not everyone can build tech, but even when it comes to the sales side, there is sometimes a misconception. It's not that you offer media and everyone will be excited and throw money in there. You need a thorough sales approach. And I mean, take a look at some media organizations, subsidiaries. They have 100+ people, even not the really large guys. So they're mostly sales. So you need to put together pitch decks. You need to follow up. You need to run a CRM system. It must be a coordinated approach. And leaving this just to the merchant usually doesn't really work. Yeah, you can put the offering out, but still you don't get massive budgets by just, I mean, Amazon can eventually do this, although they also had a large sales organization initially to scale. They are large enough, have enough scale right now to attract budgets more easily, but not everyone is Amazon. And if you're not Amazon, you actually need to push hard to get the budget. And this is also something where tech doesn't help. That's a business run by humans in the end.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, you know, one response I would have to the insourcing question with the previous retailer was, when you give me an expense account and you'll pay me to wine and dine advertisers, or I can go golfing like a proper sales executive, then we can insource our sales. It's just different. When you're the retailer, brands treat you differently and you treat them differently. And that may or may not be the best course forward. So I echo what you said.
Yeah, I'm going to have to like steal this answer because I thought it was a great answer from both of you. You kind of touched on it, Andreas, around like the sales component. Do you think we'll see a change in how media is being sold in 5 years, more automated programmatic approach? Or do you think it's kind of like, this is how media is sold today and this is kind of it?
I think at least what we're gonna see is that it's going to be easier for brands to spend their money and to measure their return. If today you want to leverage all retail media at some retailers, you have to engage with 5, 6, 7 different parties. You get 5, 6, 7 different pitches, and then you're not dealing with a single retailer, you're dealing with 20 retailers. So even though you might have a lot of budget, it's so inconvenient today to spend this. And then if we add what Mark mentioned, the whole omni-channel part in store, it's even getting more complicated, paying for shelf space. So ideally, what you as a brand would want to do, you put one budget out there, and then it's gonna get monetized across all different channels, and you get a holistic view on all the activity you have there, and that's enables you to actually leverage retail media to the full extent. And this is something which is quite difficult today.
Yeah, if I can add to that, because I think it's a great question, is we have to remove the friction of buying, and that can be handled, I think, through some technology, but there has to be a lot of alignment on the back end as well to make it work. And when I think about, like where we have to go, where there's a lot of technology online, there's not as much as we need in store, but we have to get good there. And I think about, really, I picture a future where a brand can manage their spend against consumers or against customers or whatever their target may be, and then having that strategy permeate the entire retail media ecosystem, because you may be able to reach a certain subset of your target through the established online channels we have today, and that may all be well and good, and you get the measurement you like and that kind of thing. But what about those that you can't reach with an email or banner ad, or they're never on a search results page, therefore your spend there can't reach them? Do you reach them at a register? Do you reach them through some other means? Maybe it's snail mail. Maybe that's the best way to reach 10% of your target audience. And are we making that easy for a brand to objectively make that decision about how their budget is allocated? Because in the past, we would say, okay, who's your shopper marketer? Who's your performance marketer? Who's your brand marketer? Who's your retail media person? And so like as complicated as we are on the retail side, it's been complicated on the brand side as well. And now we're starting to see this shift where it's like, I'm just trying to grow categories at the retailer. And you see this consolidation, whether it's a formal consolidation of team and budgets, or it's they're stitching together what they have, because like that's where we have to get to, is to take, I think, some of these silos out of it, and that buying friction has to go away. And the ability for a dollar to be spent on the next best contact is incredibly important. And that next best contact may be snail mail. It may be performance marketing on a search results page. So I think that's a little bit of the future that I envision, but from a buying perspective, that has to be addressed, or else it's an impossible future to even get to.
Yeah, interesting. We touched on this like 15 minutes ago around Omni, but the one thing we didn't talk about is any interesting omni-channel initiatives that you've seen recently that have popped up in, for you, Andreas, that you've seen vendor side, or Mark on the Peadpod side?
I'm actually not that deep as Mark into omni-channel. We are currently mostly focused on the online portion, so I leave that question to the who's more qualified to answer it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a compelling question, and I think this is another area where just things are going to continue to change, and if I wind back a couple of years, our argument was over whether or not e-commerce was important. Should we fund it? Should we invest in it? Is it a strategic importance? And when that debate was settled, the next question became, okay, how much? How fast? What's the penetration going to be? Is it going to be 2% of my business? Is it going to be 10% of my business? So we debated what the like how fast e-commerce was coming, but now we debate on ways to keep up. Like everything has changed, and so while many segments of retail have already had their physical to digital transformation, that happened. So whether it's tech or apparel or other industries or verticals in retail have already been disrupted. Grocery is just now hitting this. And we thought the Amazon acquisition of Whole Foods kind of started it, but maybe retailers woke up, but maybe consumers didn't make that switch. And then you start to introduce like Instacart and Shipt and Deliv, and that expanded capability and scale. So that was a little bit of a blip. And who knew that it was a global pandemic that would drive consumer behavior to all of a sudden demand omnichannel in a way they never have before. And one of the more compelling things that we've learned through this process is we more or less wrote off the older demographic of our customer, because no matter what we did, we couldn't get them to switch to online. They would never do emails. They never create online accounts. They didn't want delivery. It just didn't happen. But if we look at the segment of our customer base that grew the most during the height of the pandemic, it was that exact demographic, because conditions necessitated that service. And what we're seeing is now that things have calmed down a bit, they're still sticking with that service. So omnichannel changes. And so when I look at it, like what I think is compelling is that this idea of having not a multi-channel mindset, but an omni-channel mindset of the customer journey, starting one place and then ending another. Like the customer journey is all over the place. And for retailers, it's really incumbent on us to figure out how are we going to serve their needs, however it is they want to serve their needs. And that's the critical element. So whether it's, the big buzz right now is Walmart Plus, which is very, very disruptive. To me, I see that as an omni-channel driver. Like, what is an exciting, invigorating omni-channel initiative that's fairly recent? I would say Walmart Plus is that. It's more than a loyalty program. It's a loyalty program that's built around driving an omni-channel experience. I think the retailers that create those types of connections are the ones that are going to be positioned to win. And I think, with my organization, for a long time, we had an e-commerce solution. We had Peadpod.com. We could deliver, and we were very good. For 30 years, we delivered groceries. We knew how to run e-commerce distribution centers and warerooms. We knew how to do truck routing software and picking software. We were very good at all of this. But what we didn't have was this integration of a total customer view. How do you have an omni-channel view where the loyalty program looks the same online as it does in store? The promotions look the same online as they do in store. The price points, the experience, the benefits. I think any retailer that has an omni-channel initiative that treats the customer the same across multiple channels, that's what's most compelling to me. And then from a retail monetization perspective, our focus has really been on making sure that we have a clear strategy to win in every element of that process. We know how to do it online, or we have an idea of how to do it online. There's always room for improvement. We have an idea of how we do it in store. That stuff in between online and in store is a little bit hairy. There's some opportunity for us there. But I think the fact that the industry, for grocery in particular, is going to a more omni-channel mindset and is going to continue to see more omni-channel penetration, it's going to for us to continue to win, we have to be good at following that trend and having a plan of action in that. Because if you look at a desktop experience, we know how to monetize that. A mobile experience is very, very small. There's not as much real estate to do the big, beautiful stuff that we've relied on in the past. And then an app where feature and functionality and experience is paramount, or else your app gets hammered. You have to be very methodical about what you do there. So how do we manage that shift in customer engagement? How do we exploit customer touch points that didn't exist before, like a pickup point or a personal shopper or a customer call center that's handling customer concerns as it relates to their pickup? Like, there's opportunities for us to be more vertically integrated into our own omnichannel experience to make sure that we're effectively reaching customers when and where they're shopping with us.
From a sales standpoint, Mark, like, are you pushing advertisers to buy both online and in store now? Or maybe you always have done that, but is it more like you got to buy both? You can't just buy one or the other.
Yeah, so I would say pushing is probably too strong of a word. What we are doing, though, is we're presenting the solutions in the context of online and in store. So our story is an omni-channel story, and we think it's important to do both. Because some of our brand partners downplay the role of e-commerce, because from a penetration perspective, it may be too small for them to care about at this point. And then others way overemphasize it because they want to get on the growth train and they don't want to miss that window of opportunity, so they have to win online. And our argument is that as an omnichannel retailer, we have to build capabilities that work across all channels. So we're beginning to tell our story from an online and an in-store perspective. from forcing, like we're not necessarily dictating how that is allocated, but what we want to do is we want to disrupt the way they think about in-store, so it can be viewed as a total part of the retail media partnership, not something else. And for a lot of brands, that's still kind of in the something else bucket. And we're trying to create a more holistic solution set so we can be as agnostic as possible when it comes to where the next dollar goes.
Probably the last question before we start taking questions from the audience. So Andreas, this is for you, but Mark, feel free to jump in. So Google, pretty common knowledge that most product searches are now occurring on Amazon. Now with Walmart, Target, Peapod, plus all the vertical publishers publishing their own ad platforms, where does this leave Google? What are Google's plans when it comes to retail media? I think you're on mute too, Andreas.
Sorry for that. So
Okay.
it's a difficult situation for Google, because the clear trend we are seeing in the market is that almost all the big guys, they have a marketplace platform business strategy in place. Means they don't want to do retail anymore. They don't want to buy products, have a lot of working capital and then sell these products, but instead just provide the infrastructure and let the brands do the advertising and handle everything basically. And so as we see this business model gaining a lot of traction, I mean, take Amazon, where the marketplace business is growing at a much faster rate. Take a look at Alibaba, take a look at what Walmart is currently doing. There is definitely I can see a world where we might end up with 5 to 10 massive marketplaces, and these marketplaces, they will have a major overlap of product. And the question I have is there still a need to have an aggregator out there? Because that's basically what Google does, right? They make products on Google Shopping and then they link to the different sites. If we end up in a world with a few marketplaces, you don't need this aggregator, because the marketplace is the aggregator. And this is what we already see on Amazon. There's just no need to go back to Google. If you want to buy something, you go straight to Amazon, and then they capture your advertising dollars as well. So that's, it's highly risky. And we also saw what Google has been trying over years, like own the transaction, become a marketplace. So Walmart had started, and Target and many others. Nobody wants to do this anymore. Why? Simply because they want to become the marketplace and want to feed the beast. And I think it's too late for this strategy. And that's why Google has a hard time, or will have a hard time, in my opinion, going forward in retail to keep up with a massive growth rate we see on the Amazon side, for example.
Great, Mark. I don't know if you want to add to that or not. It was more of an Andreas question. Nothing to add.
I'll just add, we're adding a marketplace too.
Okay. So it probably makes sense for us to jump into Q&A. So we got a couple questions that just came through. This one is for Mark. What systems or processes do you put in place to make sure that the media plans for the brands aren't biased in some way?
I assume bias meaning that we're pushing, like probably a little bit of an outgrowth of the question you asked around if we're pushing them in a certain direction. But what I would say for that is
Yes.
From a strategic perspective, we've really emphasized having less hands in the cookie jar to minimize the risk of introducing bias. Because I said we want to be as objective as possible in where the next dollar is spent, and we want the data to help inform that. We've got work to do to have confidence that we can act as objectively as possible. But what I've seen, if you know, in various phases of my career, is if I ask my sponsored search partner what the best solution is, they're going to tell me it's their solution. If I ask my demo partner what the best solution is, and they've all got case studies and evidence that that's right. And so if we say to a vendor that we partner with 5 different retail media partners, and all 5 of them are going to call them, and all 5 of them are going to say that they have the best option, in a lot of cases, they'll come back to us and say, hey, I heard from 5, which one do you want me to do? And we don't really want to play that role because then we are dictating where that money gets spent, and we want to be able to objectively say, here's where it goes. And so the way that we've handled it so far is to minimize the number of players and to remove those conflicts of interest where we don't even have the option to be objective. And so by having the retailer play more a role in it, then and it doesn't matter what a partner gets from a revenue share perspective, then we do that. So I think we've removed some of those concerns from a partner ecosystem perspective. But ultimately, I think this is going to be solved through some sort of technology that allows decision making to be made without human bias. And I think we have a little bit of work to do there. But we look at past performance, and but in a lot of cases we'll say to a brand, especially if they've done a lot of research themselves, my best return on investment is product listing ads. And we'll say, go with what you've seen. We don't want to argue that because they're running this across multiple retailers. Their swath of data is broader than ours, and they know their category and their items better than we do. They're like, so who am I to argue that? So in a lot of cases, we do want to put the ball a bit in the advertiser's court to utilize our solutions in a way that reflect their strategy.
And this is my question for you, do you see like a sweet spot for the amount of vendors you would want to have in your program to kind of avoid that conflict? Because when I was at Staples, we had, I think at launch, we probably had like 5 partners. And I think my perspective was that I didn't want to have all my eggs in one basket. If one partner went down, then it didn't kill the entire program. I think my thinking on that had changed towards the end of my time there. But do you think there's like a sweet spot of how many partners you should have in that program? I don't know if there is, but it's just
I don't know if there's a sweet spot, but my mindset is that we need to have best in class wherever we can get away with it. Yeah. But if you go for best in class at everything, you will have 5, 10, 15 partners. So at some point, I think there's some element of trade-off. And I think that's one of the major downsides of outsourcing and being reliant on too many third parties is it's hard to do that. But if you look at like the different platforms that are being built for retail media, they're getting better at other elements. And so what was a PLA platform is now PLA and native. And then it's a PLA native and ad serving, and then it's audience extension. And so I think that's a big opportunity, is to have these best in class vendors become better at more stuff, giving the retailer an option to consolidate around a single solution.
Yeah, that's great. I love this question. Andreas, this is for you. I think what they're asking is, how can publishers do a better job of ensuring their site isn't overrun with ads? How can they better balance user experience with site revenue goals?
I mean, I don't feel it's a matter of how many ads you show. The question I'd rather have is, how natively embedded is this, and is it distracting? I could think of an environment where every single product is sponsored to some extent. It would become a feature of the organic algorithm. Means that if there's a bid on a product, it just gets a little more exposure. In this case, you keep relevancy, and you can define to what extent you want to lift products. I think it's a bit more complicated with banners because that's rather distracting. People want to buy products in the end, and they don't want to see ads. So I think when it comes to banners on category pages, it could make a lot of sense to have banners in there, but you have to be a little bit more careful. There's no way you can have banners all over the place. But on the sponsored product side, users don't care about whether a product is sponsored or organic. They want to find the right product. I think the strategy must be, let's make sure that whatever is being shown is relevant, and then it doesn't really matter. And I mean, take a look at Google Shopping. They changed a little bit and allowed even some advertisers to get their product in for free if there's no competition. But prior to this, it was fully sponsored, everything. And it was also highly relevant, and that's precisely what they did. They combined relevancy criteria with bids and then showed the products accordingly. So I think there's a good way of monetizing a site in a much better way without sacrificing retail margin or cannibalizing your retail margin.
Mark, anything to add? I think you're muted too. Oh.
Yeah, I just need Andreas to get out of my head. I say if you can monetize 100% and still run a great retail operation, why not? And so if that's the default, rather it's been the inverse for so long. It's here's what my beautiful unadulterated page looks like. Where am I willing to accept? What you do in that case is you don't put anything of value in your stack, and at the bottom you put 8 300 by 250s, like you referenced earlier. That's what you do when that's your decision-making criteria. And so like, I think it just has to be done from a point of wisdom. And one thing that I'm most excited about is like, how do you fuse retail media with loyalty and personalization and everything? Like that's like, when I look at my team, what we are really focused on, how do we get upstream in the product management process and the product development process? So monetization is an element of product design versus being something that we're adding on to later. And that's a huge, huge fundamental shift. And once we get there, the product managers make better products than I do, and much better than my team does. Let them bring the creativity. So if you're building a widget that's designed to drive sales, and there's a bid component to it, or there's a monetization component to it, that'll always be better than me trying to say, hey, I got a 700 or I got a 728 by 90 here. I need it 10 pixels higher. Like, that's not a great conversation. And if I'm not winning, if that's the kind of debates I'm in. And so like, I completely agree with what Andreas said. It's spot on.
I think you and I had talked about that before, Mark, like, and my old boss called it DFM, which was designed for monetization, right? So just slapping banners on the site, it doesn't work. Last question, and this is for both of you. So brands are used to working on large platforms like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. How can these brands hope to manage working with 100 different retailers, each of them running their own system for retail media?
Maybe I can get started. First of all, today it's not possible. There's just no way of doing this. Google had the probably best idea, and they pushed really hard to make it happen. And I do believe that from a brand perspective, this would be the right approach. Let me explain what they tried to change. So today, it's a retailer-driven game. You want to monetize your site and you sell your media to brands. And you kind of manage things and you play back the KPIs and you're in charge of everything, acquire the budgets, sell. What Google tried to do is shift the power to the brands and let them act from a pure media perspective and take the whole relationship thing out of the equation. So how this would work is that from the merchant center, so every brand, the ones which have at least a little DTC presence, they have a merchant center with a product feed. And from there, they can run their DTC campaigns, but they can also run vendor-funded Google Shopping. So they would just check a box and would be able to add to the bids from Staples, for example, to get more traffic on specific products. In the same way, they could run display on Staples or other retailers. But it's a network approach where the brands approach things purely from a media and ROI perspective. And we see this working kind of well for the Google Shopping format, but Google couldn't make it with the sponsored products. And we also haven't seen progress on the display side. And my impression is that it's not really welcome from the retailer side because you lose control. You can't sell directly anymore. You don't define what numbers you play back. You can't leverage your relationships. You incur the risk that the brand's budget, just a little bit of them gets to your side and the rest turns to your competitors. So as a retailer, you try to keep control, but this mechanism would make it way easier for brands to run campaigns for hundreds, if not thousands of retailers where they sell. And that's, in my opinion, the only solution that would work long term.
Mark, anything to add or?
Yeah, so I'm the retailer, so I'm supposed to be offended by that answer, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in it, and we wrestle with this quite a bit. Is we built the first version of retail media at Ahold Delhaize was basically a network model where we opted into networks that allowed brands to buy across multiple retailers, and that served us well for a long time. But it doesn't drive the growth that we had hoped for. And then you look at the landscape and you say, well, how is this business constructed? And it's built around walled gardens. So we'll build a walled garden. I think the way that the question was framed is the correct way. How sustainable is this model? How likely is it for CPGs and other advertisers to be able to sustain it into the future? So there has to be disruption. I think, whether it's what Andreas lined out, there's got to be some kind of creative destruction here that resets the landscape and makes it, whether it's a full balance or power shift from retailers to brands, or it's somewhere in the middle, something will have to change, something will have to give. And the fact that more retailers are playing, like for we tout ourselves as the 4th largest grocer in the U.S. From a retail perspective, we're kind of mid-tier. We're just an itty bitty $50 billion company. Like for me, I look at it and say, we're kind of in that cusp of who gets cut off. If there's too many walled gardens and there's not the ability to manage scale properly, where's that cutoff? Whose walled garden is on the go list, and whose walled garden's on the no-go list? And so how that gets shaped out, I think it's going to be one of the more incredible and fun things to watch over the next 2, 3 to 5 years is what happens here. Because when I look at when the super regional grocers announce that they have a retail media group, I'm like, okay, we're here now. Like every retailer has something, which means every CPG is going to be asked 300 times for money. And that in and of itself is not sustainable. And so it's got to be figured out. And I think it'll take a combination of retailers and brands to figure it out.
Great. Looks like we have 2 minutes left. So let me wrap this up. 2 things before everyone goes. I think one, if we didn't get to your questions, we will reach out and provide answers. I think the other thing is for people to make sure they register for next Wednesday's webinar. So achieving perfect Zen, balancing retailer profits alongside brand ROI and user experience. I didn't give the summary before, but I'll give it now. So, join retail media's brightest minds as they share their secrets, the ultimate balancing act. Hitting profit targets is one thing. Aligning them with brand goals and UX is quite another. Our speakers will talk you through the do's and don'ts of running a mutually beneficial program, again, featuring speakers from Overstock, Sam's Club, and National Furniture. I think that's a fantastic topic. And things that in the monetization space, sometimes we can get beat up on is that blend of revenue and experience. So I think it's a great topic. Thanks again for New York No Go for hosting. Thank you to Andreas and Mark for speaking. You guys were fantastic. I always enjoy our conversations, and I look forward to speaking with you both again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys.